They were talking about relative position in space-time, and I don't know, just thinking about this mathematical formula where your catalytic converter of a matrix intercept of uh, we'll go ahead and talk about it now. Bridge rectified AC to DC transforms such that you have control over all the color channels then becomes a question of how why do you want to distribute that for your communications array for whatever functional assembly coupled with however you want to reinforce the structure and increase its its capacity with things like quantum dots, converters of frequency, so you can upscale or downscale, or I guess you're blending interference patterns at that point. And I like the word interference patterns because it both describes particles and waves, and so you can simplify it down to just one, or I mean just integers, and then zero would just be, doesn't matter. And then what's real critical though, the real important key of just how do you do that is what you're trying to do is imagine a workflow from one point through the structure such that it basically describes it in a landscape of geometry. And so it really depends on what kind of grid coordinates you want to use to describe it because you can simplify depending on what it is using ideas of calculus, look into surface areas of spheres, cylinders, planes, all of that stuff. Worth it. And then with applying a tetrahedral imagination of one fucking plane for all of it, at least. And then there's the field effect of statics. And it basically gets like like neutrino paths throughout this entire field set in those oscillatory systems that describe the space-time coherence. And so you have so much sometimes alleviation inside the structure that you have movement seemingly or maybe faster than the speed of light because it's not what I'm not trying to solve that. But what I'm trying to say is you get these space-time densities, and when you have a plane imagined of space-time density, then you have orbital pathing. And so it's complicated because the distance from that zero is the beginning of like the logical layer that matters for you it to assemble in a coordinated fashion. And this is when we interconnect the nodes, which is cross avenues of it computing what happened with light intensity at those channels at that forefront. Because what ends up happening is this cube, this array, this catalytic converter, it is looking at the amount of energy it takes for brightness readings, like the change. It's sensing drift, and the resistance change is computed within the lattice and cross-checked with the speed of light going between the system. And so that ends up being the communication and also the field control system, because you can stack the field nodes of positive and negative onto axes. And so it's easy to just illustrate that into regular CAD when you just slide that out and just forget about that trifle of where it starts, because that's templaristic warp in a continuum. That's templaristic warp in a continuum, and you haven't proved it otherwise, because this makes everything all right in the mentality that you physically thought of it in your head. So you had a Mobius strip effect of how physics still works in a computable array for which you're describing it through whatever accessory or accessibility layers you're used to, because some people aren't listening to this. They could be reading the script on the bottom of the page. And so that cross compute is what sets the millennias ahead for our, success, and working together to basically find the ways to be certain of our continued success for a certain distance of space-time. That's really what it is we have a certain distance of space-time for which we know don't drive in that direction. That's that singularity forefront of what doesn't seem solvable based off of our total coordinated depth and intercept geometry of a distributed system. And maybe you can be certain that we got enough energy to in resonance to maybe do go beyond that, and that ends up being a proportional thing that changes at the forefront of the vessel's bow wave, and so it kind of depends on, we're all working on this together, and it's the cohesion of all of our perceptions, maybe down to the frickin' gill. I don't even know of how radar bounces through the fields for which we perceive on that spatial geometry, where you could just go ahead and simplify it down to just particles and the abacus if you're that guy on the seat of the Union Board Sector 9. So reverse that and use that base logic, and use the reference tables around, because it ends up being really fascinating how quickly we can design stuff on the fly. And so I'm looking forward to these latest innovations of how the industry works on the entire global scale, because we realize that it's so much better when we're all allies. It's a fucking continuum. Prove it. Prove it otherwise, I guess, in that virtual mentality. And let's see what happens.